there's a couple of ways you can edit your configs from here. The first is the code editor, which when you're on one of the table views it will show the entire config file. So in this case RWGmixer.xml, which pretty much is the same as Notepad as far as how you edit it. It's just a flat text file. It's using a JavaScript called Code Mirror, which is very awesome. Does all this nice color coding and that sort of thing. So first thing we're going to do is reduce the cell size and change the offset. Now what does this do? Firstly, cell size is what determines how big each cell is in the number of blocks. So a cell will be 1400 blocks across, which is the so each cell contains one hub, such as a city, a town, or a rural hub. And lastly, the cell offset will determine whether or not the center of the hub is centered on the middle of the cell, or the default default setting of 0.6 will mean that the center of the hub can be anywhere up to 60% away from the center of the cell. Now, because we're reducing the cell size, we also want to reduce the cell offset. I prefer 0. It just means that all of your hubs will be essentially in a nice even grid. Right, so first things first, let's add another cell rule. And all of these cell rule names in the rule set have to have a unique name. If you use the same name twice, then I believe only the last one defined will be found. So first cell rule, we're just going to call it custom town. Oops, if I spell it right. Now we don't want to use the same position twice, or obviously that's going to cause issues. So position, the first number is the offset and number of cells, north and south, and the second number is east and west. So a positive number means it will be north, so that would put the custom town hub one cell above the central hub. Now one other important thing is when you are adding cells to the rule set with a position set, you need to set it to probability 0 if you only want it to spawn in that position. If you have it, like for example the Wasteland hub has a 0.05 probability, so that means that it will spawn at the 00 coordinates, but it also has a small chance to spawn elsewhere in the world. Low density and high density are just essentially the same. There's not really any difference in them, so I'm not quite sure why they bothered to have different ones. And let's have a look. So, and lastly, cell generation distance is the world border, so beyond 10,000 blocks from 00 you'll have a nice big circle of radiation. Right, so now that we've created custom town as a cell rule, we also need to create the cell rule itself. I'll just reuse the first one there and call it the custom town cave count. So between 1 and 3 caves will spawn within that entire cell. The default road material will be asphalt with a width of 15. The 15 comes from 1 block plus 7 blocks on each side of that 1 block, so you can set that to 0 and you'd end up with roads that are only 1 block wide. If you set it to 1, you'd have roads that are 3 blocks wide, and so on. Possibly a bit of an oversight, they've got this in twice, you only need it once. So the hub rule is what determines what prefabs and the size of the hub itself are. So you can use the same name, you can use different names, it doesn't really matter. And I'm also going to change this from wilderness default to wilderness high. So now that we've set our custom town cell rule, we come down and add in the hub rule. Now I'm going to make a copy of the town small, paste that in there and call it the name that we defined up here, which was custom town. And we have to do the wilderness high rule as well, which is under the wilderness rules. So it is by default only just the wilderness default. You can add in as many as you want. If you are using the editor, you can have your text all over the place randomly. When you save it, it will go through and format it nicely, so it doesn't really matter if you make it look horrible when you're working on it. So this one we called wilderness high in the cell rule, and we want to increase the number of wilderness prefabs that spawn. So by default you have 15 to 20 wilderness prefabs which will spawn on the gravel roads, and under wilderness high you'll get 45 to 60 of them. Now because we've increased it, I'm going to change this to asphalt and increase the path radius by 1, so you'll get a road that's 7 wide and made of asphalt instead of the little 5 block wide gravel roads to go into the wilderness POIs. We can leave the prefab rule the same. We'll get to prefab rules in a minute, but first we're just going to go back up to our custom town. Now we want to make it, well, because we're going to use a custom hub layout, we don't need a width or height. Now if we had a look at the, where is it, one of these ones which are using the hub layouts, you can see that all you need is a hub type, hub layout and prefab rule. And in fact, for some reason it doesn't even have the path material, but so we're just going to grab a copy of that line and paste that into our custom. And for the hub layout, we're just going to call that custom town hub, actually layout, which we'll define in a minute. So just to recap, we have added the cell rule to the rule set, we have added the cell rule into the cell rules section which defines our hub rule to be used and our wilderness rule and some default settings for caves, roads and the size of the road. The hub rule is what determines the hub layout and the prefabs that are used in that hub if you have random lots, or alternatively you can define a size for the hub. So first number is the minimum, second number the maximum, which means for the rural small you'll get a 96 wide by 96 long hub. Town smalls can be anywhere from 200 to 500 blocks long and wide. And having said that, we're now going to pop down and create our custom town layout, which is right at the bottom. So there's a few examples here, and by default they're all pretty much unnecessary, so we'll call this one custom town layout. Make sure you get your capitals matching. So township types, you have the town type, which is probably the best one to use for custom hubs. You also have rural, which I believe only ever spawns a straight road or a crossroads and has no more than 4 buildings no matter how big it is. And the last one is the city township type, which will turn off all of the prefab spawners and instead use the city biome for the spawning. And also it will increase the Y offset of your prefabs by 1 block, so if you don't have the city blocks, then everything will probably end up floating and collapsing when you get near it. Alright, so under the custom hubs you can have both streets and lots. The streets are a way that you can define a start and end point for a road, and you can also add in the path material and the radius as an option on those. The lots can either be like this one, where you have a prefab defined, or you can have size defined, in which case it will choose a prefab randomly from the prefab rules that you specified under your hub rule. So if we have a look back at our custom town, we can see prefab rules are town buildings, and if we go down into the prefab rules section, we will see town buildings somewhere. Town buildings, which is a bunch of different rules. One issue currently with the generator is that having nested rules where you got prefab and rule instead of prefab name, the first line under a prefab rule will pretty much get skipped, so the garages possibly never come up in town buildings, and then under, say, gun stores, which I believe is further down here somewhere. Oh, actually we'll use garages. So garages, the garage brick would never show up. Under business tan brick 1 would never show up. Under default or vanilla settings, probably the most noticeable one that never shows up is the city blocks. Where are we? City blocks, I think they're way down here somewhere. So the courted city block will never show up where you've got the small road going and across through the city block between the 4 prefabs on that block. Only the half, the T and the full will show up. So one way you can fix that I've found seems to work pretty much every time is to add in as a first line prefab rule none. Now by doing that, obviously this one will get skipped, so that one will be included. Simple as that. Which if we save this, now once you hit save for the first time, instead of having this version number, it will instead have a draft. So if you're popping open multiple tabs, make sure that when you do a save and you go to the draft mode, you don't have other tabs still pointing to the other version, or else you'll get all sorts of weird multiple drafts going on. So now that we've saved that, obviously the save button's disappeared, and we can go back into the GUI version to have a look at our changes with a bit easier to read format. So now if we look in the rules set, we can see that we have our 4 rules. If custom town wasn't defined as a cell rule, then this would show up as red text instead of blue. We can click on that to go through to the next one, which is our cell rule, and then once again no red there, so there's no mistakes. If we were to, for example, define hub rule as custom town 1 and custom town 1 doesn't exist, then when we look at that under the GUI view, we will see eventually a red text there showing that there's no reference error. And if we go into either the XML edit or XML GUI version, we can get a context sensitive drop down boxes for a lot of things. So you can click on any of these things, and if they've got options you can change them. So hub rule, we want to change it back to one that actually exists, which of course was our custom town, and save that. So once you've made your changes and you want to turn this draft version back into a downloadable version, you'll notice that the download button is changed to a save draft. You simply click on save draft, tell it where you want to send it to, and give it a, I suppose we can just use that number since we're creating a brand new mod. Now if you're creating a new mod, then it doesn't matter if you tick these or not, that will set them as default anyway. And once that eventually saves, it will change the save draft button to a download button, at which point you can grab your configs into a zip file and use it to install the mod. Sometimes it can be a bit slow. So now that we've done that, I do think there is a bug in saving to a new mod from the default, or from the vanilla mod, so I'll just pop into change mod settings. So under here we can see that the size of the mod is fairly sizable. That's pretty much a full config. I need to sort that bug out so that it only copies the changed files. If we click on that, no, and there's another bug that doesn't update even though it has actually been changed in the background. So if you just hit refresh, you'll see that it is in fact changed it to modded files only. But then if we go back to the front page of this new mod, we'll see that there's still all of these, so just one little bug to work out. So having said that, let's go have a look at this one here that I've created, which already has a lot of changes to the mixer file, and that's the only file in there. So in here, the main difference is that I have changed the prefab rules to make them all flat rules rather than having nested prefab rules. There's issues with the way the random world generator works at the moment, in that, for example, in the city, if you had all of the sub prefab rules, then some blocks would have 2 working stiffs and 2 shotgun missiles and so on. Making it all flat like this pretty much eliminates that bug, and the only drawback being that, for example, the gas stations, if you only wanted to have one gas station, then you would normally have the nested rule with a max count of 1, so this way we ended up with possibly 1 of each of these different types of gas stations. The other issue I've found is if you set probability 1 equals 1 and other rules have probability of 0.9 or whatever, then it will cause problems. So if we just have a look at the code for that one, you can see it's just all prefab name, not prefab rule, and everything has a probability set, and quite a few have a min and max count. So min count obviously means you'll get at least one of those in the hub, and max count means you'll get no more than one of those in this case. This one, for example, you'd get up to 2. And if you don't define a min and max count, then basically those will be used to fill in any gaps. Right, so how do you install it? That's pretty simple. You just click on download, start download, it will give you the file. So I'm currently saving it to my Steam game install directory, which has all of my copies of 7 Days to Die. And if we show in folder, so when I'm installing a mod, I like to make a copy of the vanilla game folder, which, given it's only about 3 gig, is easy enough to do. And then once that's finished copying, we can just rename this to whatever we want. Call it demo. Move our zip into there and get rid of our screenshots, and unzip it to this location. So it's got the folder structure inside the zip, so you can just extract it into the root folder of the game and go yes to all to overwrite. So what we now have is our updated mixer file, which if we pop it open in Notepad, you can see is all of the comments are removed, all of the random insets and extra lines are all taken out. So this particular mixer has the what do we call it? Has a custom hub which I've been working on, and that will show up in the which location? 0, position. So I've just done that as a way of testing. Once you've got your hub set up the way you want, you can move it to somewhere else. It's just easy enough to teleport to the center of the map and have a look at what your changes to your custom hub are. So if we just have a quick look at this hub layout, we can see that it has a whole bunch of streets, and apparently 4 different lots. And if we went back and had a look at the hub rule, we can see what those lots are going to get filled with. So in this case, be from the town buildings prefab rule, which is just all of the typical buildings you'd find in a town, with a few extras added in. Right, and then from there you can just go into the folder that you've created for this new install and run the game. As you can see, I was playing Valmod. So because it's a new executable, it might get a pop-up for the firewall to allow access. And now that we're spawned in, if we wanted to go and have a look at our custom hub that we've just created, you enable debug mode, DM for short, open the menu and do set position. I don't like to port to 00 directly because there's a bit of an issue where if the terrain that you're teleporting to doesn't match the original terrain, as in it's been adjusted by a hub, then it will cause a big hole in the ground or similar. Oops, wrong button. Come on, there we go. So yeah, we've teleported into the hub, and as we can see, if we just go into fly, of course we need to enable debug mode again. So we can see we've got a whole bunch of roads all around, and just the 4 prefabs, which have been randomly chosen from the hub rule. And it's as simple as that to make a hub. Cheers for watching.